All right, welcome back, everyone, to Complexity Unpacked with Professor G. I have a special guest for you today, a former student of mine and a current RCMP officer stationed out in Alberta. So this one will be back to our Profiles in Justice segment. And obviously, you can watch, if you're watching this video, you're probably watching it on my YouTube channel, Complexity Unpacked. But you can also listen to the audio version of it on my Complexity Unpacked podcast that is available on Spotify, Apple, and Anchor. And for those of you that like social media, you can follow me on Instagram at Professor Consalvis, where I usually post updates about what's coming up on my website. And you can look at my website at www.ngonsalvis.ca, where I've posted a bunch of resources for students, as well as interviews with key members of the community to really enhance our experience as a law enforcement community writ large. So, without further ado, Constable Peters, welcome. It's going to take a little while because I always called you by your first name, but welcome and thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a very long time since we've spoken. I do remember that you were a graduate student at Durham College in my Advanced Law Enforcement and Investigations program. And during that time, I heard a little bit about sort of things you've done in your journey to policing. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
The intent for everyone who's listening, we're going to split this into two segments. So, you're going to hear me introduce Sharon all over again for the second segment, but we're going to talk a little bit about some of your experiences prior to policing, more specifically, some of the work you did in India with bonded slave labor and things like that. And then in our second segment, when we're back with Sharon, we'll be talking about women in policing and her experiences with the RCMP. So for this part one of Complexity Unpacked, modern slavery. It's a concept that, perhaps is not familiar to everybody. And I was just looking at the book you gave me back when you were a student of mine, and it was a difficult read. It's challenging, as is most things that are nonfiction and things that seemingly are far away from us. So I'm going to open this segment, if you don't mind, Sharon, by reading a little bit from the beginning of chapter 7, which was titled Body Crushing Toll. And then perhaps you'll help us put that in context.
Yeah.
So the chapter opens with, in the fall of 2003, National Geographic brought to the attention of the world the hidden reality of modern slavery. The magazine made the case that there are approximately 27 million slaves in our world today. Not metaphorical slaves, but actual slaves. That's more slaves in our world today than were extracted from Africa during 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. Many of these slaves are held in South Asia, and I have met hundreds of them. Such slavery is completely against the law, as is child sex slavery in Cambodia. But the poor frequently don't get the benefits of law enforcement, and so millions of them find themselves in slavery. That was an excerpt from the book Terrify No More by Gary Haugen, which you gave me as a gift, and I believe it was written by somebody that worked intimately with the organization you were part of. So why don't we open with, can you contextualize that little bit I just read for my listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So the number actually, like the 27 million now in 2022, they're estimating it's upwards of 40 million modern day slaves. The man, Gary Haugen, who started the International Justice Mission, he was sent to Rwanda in 1994 with the U.S. State Department. And his whole job during that time after was to count bodies. He literally went through mass graves to try and figure out the number of people that were murdered during that genocide. When he returned back to the States, I mean, you can imagine being knee-deep in graves. It doesn't matter who you are or what walk of life you come from. Really, even to experience your first dead body to hundreds of thousands is quite traumatic, right? So for him, he returned to the States and couldn't go back to his job. He felt like there was this need across the world, especially in impoverished countries where, like you said, poor people just aren't given the same treatment. I mean, I'm just thinking in modern day right now, what are we facing? We see the truck protests that are going on. We've heard about Epstein trial. We've heard all the controversy, and they're saying they can't reveal names. And, there's so much stuff going on out there, and you really start to wonder, for me, in the last week, I've been thinking a lot about money and power. and how that plays into justice. And so, as far as India goes, or South Asia in particular, that's where I was posted following university. I spent a year working alongside the International Justice Mission, the team there. And our work was particularly rescuing people from bondage slavery. So what's bondage slavery? Pretty straightforward, or like, I'll make it as easy as I can here. It's basically people have taken a loan of some sort, and quite often for a wedding or maybe a funeral, for a child's education, and then in exchange for that loan, they take it from like a local money lender. So really like the man in the village who has a lot of money. In exchange for that, they end up having to work for him. And so the people that I worked alongside and we pulled out of these situations usually worked in brick kilns, in rice mills, and rock quarries, places where labor is needed, right? Physical labor. The hard part was that often they're not treated fairly. A lot of these people can't read, they can't do basic math, so they take, let's say, a $10,000 loan for our purposes, and there's a ledger, and he says, now that you are working for me, like, this is how long it'll take to pay it off. Right. So to you and I, we'd be able to figure that out. Okay, 6 months, we got this paid. Right. Well, someone who can't do math or who maybe can't read or write is easily taken advantage of. And so instead of having deductions for hours worked or the jobs completed, they would instead be charged interest. So lots of the people that we worked with actually moved like their families into a rice mill compound, because making rice is actually a very like complex process. It takes hours and it works around the clock, from harvesting to drying to pounding, all the different things they do. It's not like you can't do it 8 to 4 in a given workday. Right. So they often live in these facilities and work around the clock, and then the owner would give them like a bag of rice for their family for the week. But instead of that being what most of us would consider just a fair thing for a boss to do, to give you some food, they would then charge them for the money, for the food. So instead of their like loan ever going down from 10,000, next thing it's 15. And then they're given a little bit of money to go and get some milk from the little store or whatever, and that's just charged and charged. And lots of these people end up in these rice mills for decades. So that's like a brief overview of what it looks like. In India in particular, and I can speak to that because that's where I lived and worked, with the team there, bondage slavery was abolished in the 70s, in 1976. It comes back to having the training for police officers and for government officials to enforce that. Now, you have to understand, in a lot of countries around the world, money speaks more than just about anything, right? So let's say you're a wealthy owner of a wealthy business, and you give money to your local police department to add a new addiction. Right. Well, they might hear some rumblings that something fishy is going on at your place, and maybe people don't want to be working there. But they're going to look the other way because that's where their funding came from, right? So I think we opened with, and I appreciate that we opened with a clear definition, because I think my first question is, how are we defining slavery in the modern context? You spoke to the prevalence, which, the book you gave me is now dated. It's almost 20 years old. So, or at least the stat I was referencing was almost 20 years old. So, the problem is increase, not decrease, which, obviously will beg the question that I will ask later. Why are we still going in that trajectory, and sort of how is the efforts not helping? And I don't imagine that answer is simple. But let me just go back for a bit, just to contextualize it, because sometimes the other side of the world, while the world is shrinking and I have more and more students from more countries, that seems like a faraway land. And I always like to point out that India, contrary to popular belief, is one of the largest economies in the world, by most standards, by most measures. It is a superpower. It is a nuclear power. It's an advanced industrial society, and yet the diversity of experience amongst the population is a challenging one to understand. So let me come back to you and ask you, what took you to India in the first place? Why India? How did you end up there? And you mentioned you went there after university. So how's that leap? How did you make that leap? For sure. Yeah, thanks for getting me back on track. That was going on. Okay, so I graduated with a criminal justice degree, and my idea was that I'd be in some sort of international law. So my background a little bit is my parents were missionaries in Africa, and so I had this idea, like I have lived on the other side of the world, and for me, I just had a real pull in my heart to continue to help champion the cause of justice in different parts of the world where they just need some assistance, I guess. Specifically with India, it was just part of the process. So I applied to be an intern with the International Justice Mission to do an investigations internship. And so originally, like, I really wanted to go back to Africa. I was born in Zambia in the southern part of Africa, and so a lot of my heart is there. But they have internships all over. So when I kind of described, like, I wanted to do some sort of modern day slavery or human trafficking work, at that time in Africa, they were doing more land property rights with widows and that kind of work. And so they suggested, like, the organization themselves suggested South Asia for me. Okay. So I had no experience or no background knowledge really than what I've seen or like my friends that I have that are from there. But India is like one of the coolest places. It definitely is a country that I feel like anyone who loves to travel should go. It's a country that is just like you said, it's like a vibrating place, and the culture and the food and the people are amazing. But there is this crazy like dichotomy of rich and poor. And I don't think I was really even prepared for what that looked like. Right?
So you were born in Africa, but where did you grow up?
So I lived in Africa till I was 6, and then grew up in Ontario, London, Ontario. Okay, is where my family is. Yeah.
So that's a big jump. I mean, arguably, we don't remember a great deal before we were 6. I'm sure there are some memories. So you essentially grew up in North America, and then your first experiences post-university in India. I do have a lot of international listeners, and I do have a lot of foreign students, international students are here. So why don't you share with us? India is a big country. Where specifically were you?
Absolutely. I was in Chennai in the south on the coast, and I traveled all over. So we have several different field offices there, and I got to go to Mumbai, I went to Bangalore and Calcutta. And then with my friends that I met, that I worked with, so we work with a national staff, and there was usually about 6 to 8 interns at any given time. And so my work friends, like, they took us in like family, and they wanted us to experience their culture and all that it had to offer. So I got to like travel all over on trains, by motorbike. Lots of people would drive around on motorcycle. The second time, so I actually went to India twice. And the second time was after I finished my program with you, the advanced law enforcement. I went back, and that time I drove a scooter. And let me tell you, there is nothing more terrifying than driving a scooter in India. But it's pretty cool.
Also, being a constable here in Canada, you would not appreciate the value of, what do they call it? Filtering, when you get between. It's illegal for our motorcycles to go between cars, but that's just common practice there, right?
Common.
No, it's. Anyways, I mean, we could talk about that for a long time. I've visited several times, but not to work. And so, I would argue I probably enjoyed the other side of it. But there's so much to know. So it's fair to assume from your comments that you work with a diverse staff of locals as well as missionaries that came from elsewhere. Would that be fair?
Yeah, very much so.
What was that experience like, working with both people from India, in Chennai or wherever it is that you were specifically stationed, and having that team? How was that? What was what's the word I'm looking for?
The dynamic.
The dynamic. The dynamic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, before I went, one of the things my dad said to me was, don't just hang out with other interns. Get to know your national staff, go to local establishments, get to know people, because that's how you experience the culture. And that was some of the best advice I got, because a lot of the people, other interns that I worked with, were American or from the UK and all over. And our natural thing we do as humans is we like to stick to what we know. Right? It's hard to actually like strike out of the norm and try new foods and all of that comes with it. So in my office in particular, like both experiences, both times I went to India were different, but both were wonderful in their own way. Sure, there are dynamics that you have to work through. I'm much more of a like I'm assertive, but not to the point of like I don't like conflict. I don't want to cause people to feel uncomfortable. I'm more of a team-based personality, and so that was very effective working with, like, in my direct team, my boss was a former police officer from the States, and then and she was a female, and then we had all male investigators, and my second time there we had 2 females. So it was pretty cool and also very different, right? And there are times that you learn to keep your mouth quiet, and there are times that you learn to speak up. And the cool thing with IJM is, like, it's a family organization. It's how it felt on the field for me. My team worked really well together. So we didn't have these big blow-ups. Some of the other teams did, and you would hear about them. But it's just working with people in general. It doesn't matter where you're from, right? There's always going to be some conflict. But my approach to that, and I've taken that into my policing job now, is seek to understand before, like, fighting to be understood. So I've really tried to stop myself from being aggressive. At times, there are times to be aggressive, right? Especially in policing, when we're arresting people, there are times.
Right.
But as far as inter-policy or conflict within the office, it really helps to just talk one-on-one and then as a group. And I think even now in my office, I'm a peer-to-peer coordinator, and that's one of the things I do. So we have conflict in police stations all the time. Sure. And I'm one of the people that will help connect other officers or our office staff or municipal employees to, like, say people need to speak to counselors, or they're looking for direction with the grievance process or whatever, the disciplinary process. Right. I'm just an extra resource now, simply because that's something that I value, right?
It's in your nature.
Yeah, so, it is.
We have been chatting with Constable Peters, who's out in Alberta today. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we will explore a little bit more about the details of the work she did. We're talking about slavery in a modern context. We're talking about her time in India, specifically with IJM, working with bonded slave labor. Constable Peters sort of outlined a definition, if you will, in our first segment there, on what modern slavery looks like and how it might be different from some preconceived notions we have of it. We talked about how this can still exist in a modern society, and we're talking about some of the implications of power and money and subjugation. So when we come back, we're going to dive into what this work actually looked like. So stay with us, and we will be right back. All right, welcome back. We've been chatting with Constable Peters out in Alberta, and we've been talking about her time before policing. And I think it's relevant to a lot of my student listeners, especially those of you that are aspiring to go into policing. You will hear a lot about the need to be involved. And, I talk about this in class a lot. It's not enough to check a checkbox. You have to be passionately involved in the things you believe in, because people will see through that, right? Just doing community service because someone told you to surely can't have a tremendous amount of intrinsic value, and I would argue it's probably not sustainable. But let's get back to the question at hand, and when we get to the end of the segment, maybe you can share some advice for students. But let's get right into it. So we've talked a little bit about why or how slavery is enabled in this day and age. Tell me a little bit about the work, the actual work you were doing on the ground there.
Yeah, absolutely. So each field office with IJM does different work. So the office that I was working in did bonded labor work. And my specific role in that office was to work with investigations. So our investigators are national staff that come from a variety of backgrounds, but basically they're the ones that go and do all the groundwork, right? So they meet with people, they get information. My role as an intern was to take the information when they return to the office. We put them in documents, like the investigators would put all their notes together, and then I would help build a case folder, a case package. and make sure that we have crossed off all of the things needed for a bonded labor charge, or for us to like have the grounds to get our legal team and our government relations team to put together the package so that we can go with the government officials to rescue people.
So this would be a good time for me to interrupt. I just want to, sort of give some legal context here. So you said you're putting together a case. What is the authority that is dealing with this? Or where are you taking this case, and whose authority are you dealing with when you're sort of coordinating this effort?
So this is within India. This is within their own Indian case law, their own court system. So the national staff does all the work, and we assist. Right? So a big part of my job, like in India is an English colony, and so the court system is very much in English. And when you have people that speak all different dialects and come from different backgrounds within a country, trying to make it in a cohesive document that flowed for court, that was a big part of my role. And then we have like a legal team with legal fellows that would come from the US, the UK, Canada, that would assist our lawyers within the country on how to do, put the legal case together, how to fight it in the court system within the laws of that country.
Right. So how receptive were the authorities to your efforts? I mean, was this a well-functioning system, or what were the challenges with doing the work? And sort of, because to your point earlier, there is a level of awareness. Surely something at this scale is not unknown. So how does that flow? Yeah.
So when I was there in 2009, 2010, and then 2011, 2012, IJM was definitely getting traction within the country, and we were becoming a more well-known organization. We were in a few situations where there were some dicey moments, absolutely, but in like our big role right now within the country is structural transformation. That was always the goal, was that the country would enact their laws, would act on them, would do their own rescue operations without us. And I believe they're at kind of at a transition now, because it's been over 10 years since I was there. But during that time, we were still like really laying a lot of ground. And while I was there, one of the largest rescue operations was conducted, where we pulled out 500 people out of a brick kiln of bonded slave labor. And the trial that went forth from there took years, but eventually he was convicted. And what I found out later was like he had done this 3 times. He had people taken from him. Then he went and found more laborers and did it again, and this was their 3rd operation. So it's very interesting, like, for me now to look back, like, I don't know what their numbers are anymore, but I just know, like, that when I lived there, to see some of those early days, those building blocks and the work that was being done was pretty neat. Within the country, yes, IJM was respected, but there's always that, you can tick off, like, different people come into power at different times, right? And they may not like what we're doing. But my experience at that time was it went well. We had a few moments where, we rescued these people from a brick kiln, and we're at a government office where they're going to give their stories. So we would have their information, but then they had to then go and tell a government official. Basically their testimony, right? So it's like anyone coming here to a police station. That's basically what we were doing there, but having it with a government official.
Right.
Because that person could grant them release and give them a release certificate, which then stated that they never had, like, their debt was paid in full. They never had to go back there. That owner had nothing over them.
So their original contract, was that something that was legal in the first place? Or is this something that we would think of more in terms of loan sharking, where you're lending people money off the books, and so you're creating your own standards? Is that a fair representation of how they're doing it?
I would say it's more like that, yeah. Because they're not doing this in, like, your affluent cities. Like, sure, they're looking for people that are uneducated in the poor caste or the poor system who just need money, right? They're on survival mode. So that's more, I definitely equate it to loan shark.
Okay. Sure. So let me flip gears for you for a second. Let's give a voice to the voiceless, because let's be honest, a lot of the stuff you and I are discussing right now, somebody with means and resource can write a book. And they can share their words and they can share their message, and that's important, because I mean, a lot of people that are writing books like this are sharing the word and they're spreading people's experiences. Now, this book centrally focuses on Cambodia, and
Mhm.
child exploitation. You're talking about something different that even if someone picked up that book, they're not going to get. I take it you've spoken to people that were
Yeah.
experiencing this life. Can you give voice to some of those conversations, some of those experiences?
Mhm.
What did you experience when you were speaking to people that lived that life?
Honestly, Neil, it is like I was reflecting before our conversation today a bit about. I went through some old emails that I had sent my parents, and you know, like when you're there working in an office setting, like, especially for me, like I'm reading reports. I was reading a lot of reports and going through information, and it was easy to go back to being a student and when you're reading for classes. But when I went on a rescue operation and I meet the names that I've been reading, in particular, like there's a couple that I remember. There was a family who, for 25 years, they had lived in a facility.
Right.
So this young girl and her husband, like they were young, 20. That's all they knew, and they just had a baby, like 8 days before we did this rescue operation. And I got to hold this brand new baby, and I just wept because all I could think about is this little baby will hopefully never have to experience slavery in their lifetime again.
So what
And
you're
the work that,
describing, so sorry,
yeah,
what you're describing is really analogous to what maybe many people think of in terms of slavery as we know it and talk about a multi-generational
mm-hmm,
experience where
absolutely.
those that have taken the loan are not necessarily those that are still indentured. Would that be
That's
a
right.
fair
Yes,
characterization?
that's
Yeah.
a very good summary. Yeah,
So
yeah.
tell me a little bit more about these conversations. What's it like when you are involved, and is there like a moment when people have a realization that they've been living a life of subjugation and they're perhaps not knowing it, or is it that they're well aware of their circumstances and the conditions and just have no path out? Which,
I would say both. So
right,
there's a couple that I remember where we did a rescue operation, and the owner wasn't at the facility when we went, and he came back, and people trembled in fear. Like you, like to see the fear of another human being. In North America, we see fear very different. Um, I mean, like, let's say 30 people in front of you that are, their whole bodies are trembling. Their eyes are wide. They're terrified because this man has physically, sexually assaulted however many of the group.
right,
And they are so afraid that he's going to stop whatever we are about to do. Um, that itself was like quite difficult to see. I was also part of a time where we made a human chain around a group of people because an owner and his group of friends showed up and they were drunk and they were like very rambunctious, and the people were so scared
right,
that me and a group of us, we just encircled them and we just tried to keep reminding them, no, you are safe. Like
right,
we are here. We are going to make sure that we can get you to a safe place
right,
and get away from them. But now that I'm a police officer too, like it's an interesting time to be in those situations, right? And
right,
unless you have ever experienced any kind of abuse in your life or any kind of difficult circumstance where you really feared another human being,
right.
it's hard to wrap your mind about like how some of these people are living on a daily basis.
So
There are
let's go
others.
there.
Go ahead.
So
Yeah,
can I go there for a second?
yeah, yeah.
Let me put a question out that somebody might be thinking, and you might not. It might not be a fair question, so feel free to tell me if you think it isn't. I think some people listening, if you don't have a lot of experience with the kind of sort of lived realities you're describing, might wonder why a critical mass of people cannot
Mm-hmm.
deal with a small number in power. You want to speak a little bit to that dynamic there that allows
Yeah,
a smaller number of people to subjugate a larger group. Is that a fair question?
yeah. I'm just trying to think how to answer. Um, Honestly, fear, power, and money. Like you look through history, um, a lot of the big dictators, right? That's how they controlled population, right? And so, um, yeah, I mean, you can lead people to believe what you want them to believe. And if people don't have an awareness, if you don't know the other opportunities or other ways of life, and this is all you know, and you are just kept really enslaved, like for these people in particular, they're kept hardly like sleeping, eating properly. They're so physically exhausted, they can't really think about freedom. And for
Right.
lots of them, they don't even know what that looks like, right?
Sure.
Some of the cases that we did there came by word of mouth. because somebody got out and then they found out that their brother and his family were in another facility. And so they brought hope to people. Usually, though, it just takes one person. Like, quite often, we would have one person from a facility that would tell us, like, that would be brave enough to realize that this is not what he wanted for his wife, for his family, realize that something is wrong. Now, for some, it takes years to find someone that's going to believe them and help them. And for others, they are resourceful and resilient, and they keep going, right, to find the help they need.
The goal is always to try and get more people feeling, empowered, or at least reaching out to somebody who might be, because otherwise you just have a continuation of a cycle, right? So let me ask the second question then, that might seem on the nose, but I'll put it out there anyways. I think someone's thinking, and my whole podcast is based on unpacking complexity, so I'm going to ask the questions. Otherwise, we never get to it, right? I'm not interested in a nicely clean packaged show. So, why do you have more success standing and making a human wall to protect people who also have masks? So, what is it about you and your group? I'm using the you in the universal you here. What is it about you that can make a human wall actually functionally valuable? Why?
Yeah, why? I mean, so the answer that I don't want to say, but one of the things in India specific was the fact that I was white. Right. And I worked for an NGO, an international NGO. Right. And there was a group of us, because we weren't national staff, there's a bit of that international pressure that comes from other places. And so phone calls were made up the line at different times when needed, where we were in danger. People back off, power listens. The last thing they want is an international incident to happen, right?
So power and privilege used appropriately in this circumstance, you're looking at a set of circumstances where perhaps the color of your skin provides a level of gravitas to somebody who might ordinarily see someone else as being less than. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's right.
Excuse me. And did you go in with, was there armed support? Was there, what kind of tactical support do you have? Or is this literally volunteers going in, doing their best? And how much cooperation do you have with local law enforcement?
Yeah, so we always took local law enforcement with us, and they always came armed. But as far as like an organization, I mean, yeah, we're civilian, and we do a bit of training, but I'm not going to speak to the specifics just in case, because you never know. But like, we always had armed guards. Whether or not they would at the end of the day defend me, I don't know.
Right. Sure.
But we hope. Yeah.
No, and I think I'm trying to highlight that these are difficult situations, and it's sometimes, I think, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but the line is one thing. It's a physical barrier you formed, but really what you're bringing to that table is resource that otherwise might not be accessed. It is pressure that might otherwise not be influenced, and it's relief for somebody that does not have a voice. Is that
Yeah, I think that's all. Yeah.
We could probably talk about this for hours, and I don't mean to sell the subject short, but at some point, I think that my goal here is to introduce a topic, encourage reading, encourage growth and knowledge. I think freedom is an interesting concept, and sometimes when you're born in countries where it's a guarantee, we take it for granted, and it's not a guarantee for everybody everywhere. So let's talk a little bit about, I have one tough question, and then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up on this segment. I cited a statistic from 2003, and you said that number is arguably higher. So given the awareness, given the work, why are we seeing an increase and not a decrease? Why is this going in the wrong direction? In your opinion?
For sure. It's really good, but difficult question to answer. I think part of it is, like, we used to think of drugs and guns as the big thing, that big criminal enterprise, right? Well, there was a stat where in 2014 they believed that like the buying and selling of human beings would surpass that, and here we are, almost a decade later, and absolutely, human beings. At the root of it, I believe that you can buy and sell another person and use them for however you're going to use them. Unfortunately. And the long-term dividend is there. And I don't really know how else to answer. Let's change that a little bit. like a drug disappears. A person, as long as you keep them alive, they can keep on working for you, right? And so why has our efforts not worked? I do believe that there are countries where we are seeing a turnaround. The problem is that, especially during hardship, like let's even talk COVID since that's the time, lots of people are looking for other ways to make money. And so we are finding here in Canada in general, some of the stats that I've seen, like it's younger and younger with human trafficking, and it's sometimes peers. So I think also with the internet and all the information at people's fingertips, people, unfortunately, though it can be used for good, are using a lot of things for evil.
Sure.
And that's, I don't know at the end of the day why the numbers are going that way, but.
All right. How about this? If you were encouraging somebody else to get involved, why should people still be optimistic? Why should people still get involved and not be discouraged by the fact the numbers are trending in the wrong direction? How's that for a better question?
That's good. Yeah. Honestly, I think it takes to meet one person to know you made the difference in one person's life. It makes all the years worth it. And for me, like there were a couple of kids when I was working in Asia that really made an impact on me. And just to know some of the history that they had gone through, where they had lived, but then to see their carefree smiles and resilient spirit, and to know that the trajectory of their lives will forever change because of the work we were doing, keeps it going. And there's nothing better in the world than helping another human being. And that doesn't matter what kind of circumstance, if you're a teacher, if you're a nurse, like all the things that people do every single day. When you make someone's life better, even if you just buy someone a coffee and like they're just like, wow, thank you. Like I just really needed that. To be kind. Today's Anti-Bullying Awareness Day, right? So I'm wearing my pink shirt. That's why I'm wearing it underneath. But that's a real big thing that human beings, we need each other. If anything we've learned from COVID is we need connection. And I would say it doesn't matter your walk of life. Everyone needs to feel loved and seen. And so, yeah, if you're thinking about joining the fight or where do you get started, don't be discouraged. There is a lot of people that are waiting for you in whatever capacity that you can fill. And everyone is unique. So we all have our own gifts. Neil and I are completely different people doing different things. But here we are after all these years reconnecting. And my time at Durham College was a big turning point for me. Like I didn't know at that point whether I was going into international law or whatnot, but I did a practicum with the RCMP because of my time in India. And it was really during that practicum that I was like, yes, I want to be a police officer. So every person you come in contact with is going to can encourage your trajectory in life. And a quote that I live by, and I'll leave it with you, is that you're going to be the same person you are today 5 years from now, except for the books you read, the places you go, and the people you meet. So do those things, educate yourself, and be good human beings. We need more of them.
Yeah, and be intrinsically motivated, right? I mean, you can't do this. You can't do this to put it on a resume. That's
no.
All right.
No, you sure can't. No.
I keep coming back to that point. And I really think it's important that we don't lose sight of why we do what we do. And if we are not intrinsically motivated to it, then I think I don't mean to diminish the efforts of people that are doing it because they feel they must, because the work's still being done to a certain extent. Yeah. But I think that there's something to be said for being intrinsically motivated and sort of making an attempt at doing something in the world. Obviously we've been talking a little bit about human trafficking, and specifically from a labor perspective. This is not human trafficking is not confined to labor. It includes sexual exploitation. It includes a whole variety of things. It isn't limited to one country. This is not just a South Asian issue. We are, you can look up the research and see about incidences and prevalence rates of human trafficking across Europe, across North America. It is a global problem, and get informed because, right here we are in Durham region in Ontario, Canada, for those of you that are outside. And our major highway is considered one of the major sort of corridors where people are moved. And so that's right in your local backyard. You don't have to go across the sea. You should, if you can. But even if you can't, not everyone can travel like Sharon did to India. But there are things you can do everywhere you live, because community is where we begin and then we grow from there. So, Sharon, thank you for sharing that. It's a lot to unpack, and I don't know, maybe at some point we'll talk a little bit more about it. But I appreciate you being here. When we are doing our next segment, we'll talk a little bit more about your transition to the role of policing. So, thank you for being here. For everybody, you were listening to Complexity Unpacked with Professor Gonsalves. Like I said before, if you're watching this, you're watching it on my YouTube channel, Complexity Unpacked. The podcast is available on Spotify, Anchor, and Apple Podcast. It's called Complexity Unpacked, and you can follow me on Instagram at Professor Gonsalves with the hashtag Canine Professor. So, thank you for listening, and we will be back with Sharon on our next segment. Stay tuned and check out that episode. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Sharon.